Yeah, you're all good. All right, cool. Thanks. All right, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us on our June Affordable Housing Ordinance Working Group meeting. First, want to start off with public comment, since you have one individual in the room for public comment. So please introduce yourself, and you have 3 minutes to give your comments.
Yes,
Nick.
Thanks.
Yeah, I think it's me. Hey, Nick Cummings here, land use attorney. I'd just like to offer this all before you guys discuss the potential ordinance changes tonight. Affordable units in any development need to be paid for by something. If a developer offers on-site affordable units, the rents for those units must be subsidized by the rent for the other units, which means rents need to be high enough to help pay for the units that are essentially adding no financial value to the project, though they add substantial community value. Developments are expensive, and ultimately the income over time from the project, meaning rent, has to pay for the cost of the land, the cost to build the building, the cost to borrow money at each stage, and to pay everyone who needs to help design the building and get it approved. So at the end of the day, affordable housing is at least in part paid for by the rent everyone else pays, which is already high and only going up. And if Arlington asks for too much from developers and they can't provide it, or don't even apply for new projects, or can't get them approved, will succeed only in reducing new supply and therefore increasing rents in Arlington, making it even more unaffordable. Ultimately, the best way to reduce rent, aside from committed government subsidies, as we've seen in cities across the country, is to allow more supply to be built at costs that justify actually building it. We've seen rents go down in certain markets where developers were allowed to build enough units, and allowed meaning regulatory policies that respond to economic costs, everything that goes into regulating the production of housing. In Arlington, we've seen rents go up so much, primarily because we have not built enough units over the course of really 20 to 30 years, in part because we simply are not allowed to build enough housing to meet demand. The same goes for really any community benefit. The more the developer is asked to do, the more rent they must charge to make the project work. So I'll just remind you all that this is a delicate balance, and while developers are happy to provide on-site affordable housing, it has to make sense within the financial realities of the project. And I encourage you to remember those financial realities of constructing a building as you review potential changes to the ordinance. So, thank you.
Thank you so much for your comment.
Yes, that's only public comment.
So moving on to our second agenda item, we'll be comparing Arlington's affordable housing ordinance to other Virginia localities. And to present, we graciously have 2 experts here to talk to us about that from Navajo. So
You can share on your computer. I'm happy to on mine. Would you like me to?
Sure, that'd be great.
Okay, 1 second. Let me.
Thank you so much. Well, I guess we can get introductions started while we get the presentation keyed up. So my name is Jill Norcross. I'm the Executive Director of the Northern Virginia Affordable Housing Alliance. So really happy to be here today with my colleague, Alice, who you know, Alice Hogan, who's our Director of the Arlington Alliance. And I think we'll just do a quick intro of Navajo. We have a slide for that, but just to level set, we were really honored to be able to unify with the Arlington-based Alliance for Housing Solutions, and that happened at the beginning of last year, January 2024. And then if you can go to the next slide, sorry, Alex, you can just see what our mission is, basically to increase supply of and equitable access to affordable housing, and we do that through education, advocacy, and community partnership, and there's our core beliefs. So just a quick introduction to our organization. And then, probably we'll move through just like a quick history. I'm going to talk a quick history about the ADU ordinances in Virginia and just really kind of to level set where we were, where we've been. It's over 50 years of affordable housing ordinance, activity that we've had in our state. And I think you'll see some different changes in the timeline here. Basically, the first ADU ordinance was takes place in Fairfax County back in 1971. It was challenged in court, so there's a familiar theme that you'll see here. I won't read all of these dates, but did want to highlight that. That led to some changes into the Virginia General Assembly enacting the section of the code that we refer to as 2304, which relates to the mandatory affordable dwelling unit ordinance. You probably have reviewed some of this in your preparation, but did just want to make sure that we kind of all had a quick history. So in 1990, Fairfax County adopted this new ADU ordinance, Loudoun, and then Arlington followed, and there was the lawsuit that Arlington County was participated, and that really led to Arlington County we call it special treatment, which I don't think is the technical term, but where you're operating under a different section of the code that requires you to go back to the General Assembly to make changes to it. And I think that really speaks probably to maybe why there haven't been changes to the program that we have seen in other jurisdictions. More recently, City of Fairfax, City of Charlottesville were able to get the mandatory section of the code through the General Assembly. For the City of Charlottesville, it took them 5 years, 5 times to kind of get that approval back in 2020. And then this year, we just saw the City of Christ Church be able to get that mandatory section of the code. So there's really not that many jurisdictions in the Commonwealth that allow it. We can share these slides later, but we did do, Navajo does lunch and learns each month, and we did do an ADU session last year with our partners from Housing Board, Virginia, Jonathan Knopf, and then Sarah Coyle-Etra, who really helped draft the ADU and work with the ADU ordinance in Loudoun County. So just kind of wanted to level set where we have been. You can go to the next slide with current conditions. So what we're seeing here, Prince William County just adopted their first ADU ordinance this month. They're the first to use this section of the code that's really voluntary. No jurisdiction has used 2305.1. Again, we mentioned that Falls Church had received it. We have had statewide mandatory 2304 authority legislation passed both out of the Senate and the House. In the General Assembly, but it was vetoed by the governor. So wondering moving forward, obviously, if the next General Assembly provides a new opportunity for Arlington, this is why I think we're hoping for additional changes coming forward. So just some observations before we dive a little bit into Fairfax and Alexandria's programs, that we see that they are evolving, being tweaked, although the process can be slow. Noticing that what drives Fairfax Loudoun and the City of Alexandria's program and their authority is very different from how Arlington's is codified in the state legislature. We discussed that. The 2304 authority, which we really try to promote, Prince William going after their own 2304 mandatory authority. Because it really allows a jurisdiction to create their own program that's specific to their own housing needs and targets. So I think that's really important, and something important to consider is that every jurisdiction has a different housing plan, different goals and priorities that hopefully the ADU ordinance can address. Here, I know you call it the AHO. So I'll probably mess that up. But again, so given the local housing markets, our history, housing priorities, politics, our forms of government, building types, development patterns, we really just want to recognize that one jurisdiction's program can't really easily be compared or replicated in another jurisdiction. I think that holds true in Arlington, but did just want to give you an overview. And I do think, to our public commenter, any change in inclusionary zoning programs really does take a lot of time and intentional work with a large group of stakeholders, especially the developing community, to make sure that it works. Thank you for that. So Fairfax County, the oldest ordinance, you can see there, I just have some links if you wanted to learn more. It does take place, I guess, which is different from Arlington, across the board, both at rezoning, special exception, subdivision, and site plan changes. So, and it applies to 50 or more dwelling units, and it's only residential. I know Arlington has the commercial component, as does Arlington, but that's just something to consider. And it only applies to wood frame and multifamily construction of 4 stories or less. So again, I think that's really something different than we see here in Arlington. To note, some interesting, I guess, benefits that because we have a housing authority in Fairfax, the RHA has the exclusive right to purchase up to 1/3 of the for sale ADUs, which has been a great supply of affordable housing that the county's been able to control and preserve as longer term affordable housing. The rental program and the rental program, really 1/3, the parameters for which we operate, 1/3, and I'll say we because I'm a resident. 1/3 of the units are at 50% AMI and 2/3 have to be targeted at that 70% AMI targets. And the for sale program in the ADU serves up to 70% of the AMI. Affordability is 30 years for rental and 30 years that's renewable for the for sale. And there is a companion voluntary workforce dwelling unit program in Fairfax County that is targeting a little bit higher incomes. I will say within the last 5 years, we've seen them reduce that income level. So both rental and for sale were going up to like 100% and 120% AMI. And they were having a lot of challenges selling and renting units at those higher AMIs, and that's been scaled back. I know I sat on the task force for the for sale, and now we're targeting 70 to 100% AMI and hoping we can have an easier time for the developers to actually sell those units. We saw that people at the higher incomes have more opportunity in the regular market, and they weren't really willing to kind of go through the process to be part of the WDU program and fill out all the paperwork when they have it. So just an example, we're seeing in Fairfax, we see the single family attached product. The density is up to bonus is up to 20%. And the ADU requirement, you get up to 12.5% that are required of additional affordable units. And hope in predicting that that density bonus, which is key, pays for those additional units. And then multifamily attached, up to 10% with the ADU requirement is up to 6.25%, although they can elect to do more. They can elect, the developer can elect to do the 20% and 12.5% in multifamily too. You can see the production over time. I will say, I think Fairfax County developed this program really in an effort to create more affordable for sale product. That was the intent. So you'll see that that is almost over 1,600 units of for sale ADUs, and then almost 1,000 of the total rental ADUs that have been created. And then looking at the city of Alexandria, their program again is really different. They do have that 2304 mandatory requirement, and they have a variety of ways, not always mandatory, that they handle inclusionary zoning. So the developers are allowed to make a housing contribution in the form of housing units that might be required or voluntary. They can convert those units to a monetary contribution, and they can also locate affordable units offsite too. So again, similar to Arlington County. You can see the monetary contributions, and I apologize, the text is probably a little harder to read, but it's much higher than what Arlington sees here. And it's based on, whether it's non-residential, they allow for the commercial contributions, a tier 1, tier 2 residential, and then also looking, because they really do have a lot of conversions from residential, commercial to residential that are taking place. Their section of the code that deals with this is section 7-700. I am not a zoning expert, so I want to have that caveat, but it does allow for increases in floor to area ratio, density and height, and reductions in off-street parking as that important incentive to provide low and moderate housing. And then something that's pretty unique to the city of Alexandria is a special zone that they created back in 2019, which is a residential multifamily zone that allows substantial density bonus to induce landowners to preserve or produce affordable housing at much lower AMI rates of like the average of 40% AMI. They've used this in 5 projects so far. It tends to be mostly LIHTC developers that have project-based Section 8 contracts as a part of it to achieve that deep affordability. But they basically, the owner can develop 3 to 5 market rate units to subsidize every one deeply affordable unit. And they have tweaked that a little bit in their zoning for housing and all for all initiative that took place last year. So I'm going to turn it over to Alice now to talk a little bit about Arlington and how that might compare to what we have in the city of Arlington.
So we're all familiar with the ordinance, right? And in Arlington, our type or our section of the code is because of our county manager form of government. And also from the timeline you saw, result of an earlier lawsuit. So this is our own specific, we just said, code for just for Arlington. And when, researching, talking with people, really thinking like the way we have it written, what it is now probably best suits Arlington because of our housing market. And because if we go trying to return or get into the other sections, we will lose some of the aspects that we have, which are good aspects, right? So like Jill was saying, not all of them have both commercial and residential. So we would hold on to that. And then we have I was calling it 2 bites at the apple, because we can ask for density. The ordinance allows for us to get a contribution from both the base density and the bonus density. So there are positive things, even though there are constraints. Okay, so I just put together what I was thinking we were considering to be the problems and where to maybe go. So the in lieu of cash contribution, we know is valued 1/3 to 1/2 less than what it would cost to create those equivalent units. So that's why almost everyone chooses that avenue when they can, and it's ending up shortchanging the county by that amount. So it's really, the calculation is too low. And in other words, we're foregoing a lot more revenue than if it had, like when it began, it hasn't kept up with the market. So now we're really behind. And as Jill was saying, it's so difficult to get this change in Richmond that, we've been talking about this and commissions and groups of people and advocates for a while. And it may be, because of the study that happened and a lot of other, people kind of wondering when, maybe we're starting to feel like this year could be a possibility. So it's good to be thinking about this and trying to get it ready. So what we would do is recalibrate. And I think, not to jump ahead, but I think that's some of what Russell is going to go into the report, and then what a recalculation or calibration might look like. So the idea is to bring them together so there'd be more even valuation across the 4 options. So that's a difficult thing to do, right? We need permission from the General Assembly, and they don't give that very often. So the idea behind the way to get that is to create legislation that would allow us to do that, and they will have to modify that section of the code for us. So that is a big task. As we said, we have our own section, and to do this, it will be many steps. So we first have to determine, what is the gap? What is the recalculation? What would that look like to bring the in lieu of payments up? Decide on that, and that's a process, right? Figuring out what, like the speaker was saying, we may have a number that we're all comfortable with, but if it's not, it has to work for everybody. And that's, I think the round table and other things took years to get to that. So we don't know, how simple or difficult that will be. So that's where we would go to the development community and figure out, we don't want to disincentivize, right? We need it to be where folks will still want to develop. And yet the county could, benefit from a different calculation. So it's going to be a balance. So once those items, which could take quite a while, are in place, then we know we need to go to the county manager. We need to go to the county board members. If everyone's online, then their legislation would be created to this effect. And then we would go to our delegation, right? See who, if they're comfortable supporting it, and then who among them might sponsor it. So these are just recommendations. We have a process here, and so not to jump ahead, but just in looking at it and talking it through, these are just ideas that we wanted to bring forth You know, we know this could take months, if not years. And it's something that everyone has to agree to, which could be a big task. And then time-wise, just noting in there how the kind of General Assembly cycle goes, where the summertime is really when people are finalizing their legislation. Early in this fall, they are going to their delegation or to others who support these causes to get supporters and sponsors for their bills. And, you know, really probably by like Thanksgiving, they are done doing all of that. So our time frame, if we really thought this could happen this year, is very, it's reduced just to a few months. So folks, you know, they've had things teed up from last year, you know, all that kind of thing. So to get a new bill very fast by the fall is pretty ambitious. So I just wanted to lay that out there. Maybe we may all already know that. So the idea that we had was then, you know, continue to pursue this avenue, investigate these things, try to move the ball forward. And unless somehow we ended up getting it done and sponsored this fall, while that process is going, and if not, then it would be hopefully ready for next fall. Then one thing we could do is look at all the things that we could locally enable here as a county, what we can do without permission from the General Assembly. So that's streamlining, that's, you know, identifying different CAF funding sources. And then there are a few groups, Navaja, Voice, I think YIMBYs, you know, maybe this group could move into that too, are really trying to bring together some many low and no budget impact modifications that we could bring forth, maybe prioritize them, and then come back to the Housing Commission, talk with county board and staff, and maybe, you know, staff has many of these suggestions already. So it will be like combining all these things, maybe creating some sort of a prioritization, and then kind of looking at what is feasible short term, middle term, long term, and, you know, which ones to go after in terms of impact. Like there might be something easy, but it's not going to do much. So maybe we would, you know, so those kind of conversations we would need to have as well. So that's kind of where we were in our analysis, and just I guess really wanted to make sure people understood that we feel like we really are in like the Arlington column, like lane. We really cannot utilize other people's lanes to, if we got in their lane, we wouldn't do as well. And we really can't change ours the way they can change theirs. So we really are kind of working in our own milieu and having to work within those confines. So yep, that's about it. Yeah.
Really appreciate you breaking this down so well to show not that our model is necessarily superior or inferior, it's just our model, and that there are trade-offs. Jill, I appreciate you mentioning that. Looking at the Fairfax model, their ordinance applies to wood or stores under, right? Which is not applicable to a lot of areas in Arlington, where we would need more density and would have to have this.
And emphasis on home ownership, where ours could be
Right.
both.
Renting and so on, right? So thank you for giving the presentation. Does anyone have any questions? Yes.
Yeah, Allison, this was great. You didn't address transfer of development units at all. I understand that's being used in the county, TDR. You had any experience with that?
That is a tool, but I don't think it fits in this conversation. That could definitely go on the list.
Okay.
I mean, it is already a tool,
I mean-
and we have used it.
Okay, but
That
where is it mentioned? I mean, I've been doing research, I can't find it, and I'm currently reviewing a proposal in my neighborhood where they're using it.
Russell, you could point us to
Take that
it.
one? I know it's very specifically the Columbia Pike
Right,
neighborhood
there's that
form-based code has a very specific, but there are other.
Okay, can you give me a citation where I can read about this, or is it
The
just?
Columbia Pike form-based code, I can get you a citation for. I'd
That
have
was
to
the
do some-
Macy's project, right?
Yeah, see, that's outside.
Yeah, the Macy's project used.
They're using it, and I'm not at liberty, to something being developed in my neighborhood is gonna be using it. Crestmont,
Well, they're gonna attempt to. I don't know if they're going to. but
well,
the Tool they're looking at, is that
right,
fair to
right.
say?
But I'd like to kind of, if there was a way to discuss it, because what it does, if you're in an area where they just can't absorb it, that developer will transfer it to another one to do it in an area where they can absorb those units. And in my view, that's a good thing. That is supplying affordable housing where a project can't do it, and it's a good thing. And maybe we should do more of that rather than having the developer pay whatever this dollar amount, which really isn't enough to support a unit and stuff like that. It's almost like a one-for-one replacement. Whatever. So I would like us to discuss that and socialize it because I think that is a good thing.
So you have a comment online from Richard in response to that. So Richard, can you hear me?
Yes,
right.
just wanted to clarify again, Richard Tucker with the Housing Division, just to clarify, transfer of development rights. It's a policy of the county. It's listed as part of our policies in the general land use plan. And there is a reference in the zoning ordinance as well. Transfer of development rights occurs when when the county's goals are met. The goals being the preservation of affordable housing, the preservation of open space, there may be one other thing where, so there has to be a specific goal that's met or a county policy that is met. So when a transfer occurs, there is preservation on the sending site, and the developer can then use the density on that sending site on a receiving site. So it's not, so there's, so there has to be a combination of things that happen at the same time. It's not any developer can just transfer whatever. It's, you have to meet the county's goals, which at this point are open space, affordable housing, and a third thing is historic preservation. Forgot that for just a second. So
Well-
if those goals are being met, then there can be a transfer.
Thank you, Richard. Those are all good goals. So
So, and who did they trade with? Who did Wakefield Manor trade with?
The Wendy's site.
The Wendy's.
The Wendy's site. So that was an example here. And then we have the Haven Apartments, that was Macy's. And we don't have one that's on Columbia Pike?
so is Macy's, Alice, it's Macy's receiving or giving?
Yeah,
They're receiving?
yeah, because Haven was preserved. Same with the Wakefield Manor, right?
First, Audrey, you have your hand up first.
Tangential to this, I'm wondering if I've heard that Alexandria and maybe Fairfax or Fairfax City also allows affordable assisted living to be asked for. Is that true?
I think Alexandria does. I don't know about Fairfax City, but I could look into it for you. But I know Alexandria does. I did speak with Tamara Djokovic, who kind of monitors that this morning, and it's challenging. They're having a really difficult time making that work. And to be honest, because the cost of the services are so high, as you all know, anybody knows anything about assisted living. So it isn't, they are working through it, but it is not easy.
And I don't know if it's public, but I think Culpeper is giving up theirs that they've had.
Just the cost.
And it's true that assisted living, so in Arlington County, if an assisted living facility is coming in with a site plan proposal, it is subject to the ordinance. So, but they, like all other developments, they have those four options: providing the units on site, off site farther away, or a cash contribution. And because the cost of services, we're likely only to see the cash contribution.
And I'm wondering if, even if it was just the unit and not the services, that would go a long way in helping people and get around the services issue, which I understand the complexity of. But if they could just provide the rent for the unit, that's a good step.
I think we had that discussion with Sunrise South, right?
Yeah.
So, and they opted not to.
One unit.
Yeah.
But they were talking about services at that point.
Right, and
And I'm saying, let's think about maybe on
wondering how idea to try to separate those out and at least have the unit and then figure out some of their sources or their own, Medicaid or Medicare or
I mean, it's
whatever.
almost like a separate, I hear you, it's like a separate conversation. I don't know how easily you can untangle the housing costs from the service costs. Like it's a separate financing. I have no idea how the business works.
So I'm looking at that for the house. I'm on the housing committee for the Commission on Aging. So I'm looking for numbers for that. If that helps.
The huge problem we have no answers for, isn't it?
It's a growing problem.
Figured it out, yeah.
Well, thank you for the presentation. That was very helpful. Just have one comment and one suggestion. The comment is more of a procedural comment that for legislation like what we'd be considering here, since it's particular Arlington County, the procedural rules of the General Assembly require a 2/3 vote. So there's an extra procedural hurdle to clear there. But, you know, one thing that you talked about in your presentation was, you know, what could the county do absent to change the statute? And one thing I think came up the last meeting is, and it's mentioned in this report, is, you know, the having on-site CAFs in exchange for bonus density is an unwritten county policy. It's a preference, but the statute allows theoretically AHIF contributions in exchange for bonus density. So that's one thing that, you know, we can maybe consider, because I think, you know, being the NAP representative, I think developers would be interested in paying more AHIF. I think a lot would be happy to do that in exchange for bonus density. The trade-off being you wouldn't necessarily have as many CAFs on site for a market rate project. That is something the county could absolutely do without legislation.
And I think that's kind of a good thing, because if the county can use the AF anywhere else, it's more money in the kitty to give out. And we're at least providing.
Right. Sure. Yeah, and the report talks about, you know.
But people led us to believe that that's a bad thing, that developers, you know, paying up and they're not doing enough.
But like 90% of the CAFs since 2006 have been through AHIF, right? Roughly. So, I mean, that's where you get your bang for your buck.
And the county does have the option already to decide, like staff can recommend through the site plan process, look, guys, we're only gonna get 1 unit or 2 units, depending upon this project, right? We recommend contribution.
Yep.
So Matt, what are you recommending?
I would say
Revise
maybe
that.
look at the county policy and say case by case, we would consider additional AF contributions. And that would be
Yeah.
subject to negotiation with staff and with SPRC.
Yeah.
And having that in exchange for bonus density, because I think it was in 2018, 2019, the zoning
Yeah.
ordinance changed to allow for theoretically unlimited bonus density.
Mhm.
So it's really for affordable housing, community facilities, other public projects, things like that. So relooking at that unwritten policy, I think, is a good place to start, because then that's a way, you know, you don't have to rely on Richmond to get more AHIF.
Yeah.
You can just do it here in exchange for bonus.
All right, let me tease at that a little bit more if you're okay. You don't have to represent the entire development.
Yeah.
If you want to, I'd love to get it on record, but
Nick's dying on the call there. But one of the things I wrote down was, and I suppose this probably would require a GA fix, but one way to tweak it, like what you're talking about, Matt, is saying, okay, like we allow more flexibility as far as contribution. You know, so in exchange for that, one idea might be, you know, maybe we ask applicants to, you know, provide a slightly higher AHIF contribution in exchange for the preference of just doing both base and bonus density through contribution only.
Right.
That's the exchange.
Right.
You know, you pay, you know, you pay 115% or 120% of what previously was the AHIF contribution. In exchange, you just write one big check.
Right.
And it's all.
And no on-site units.
And
at
no
that point.
on-site.
Right.
I'm throwing that out
Oh,
there
yeah.
as an idea, you know, for.
So figuring out incentives that we can work on it at home, quote unquote, in here, right? Yeah.
And I think that helps with predictability too, because for the on-site CAFs, you don't necessarily know going into the SPRC how many you'll be providing. Where AHIF theoretically do the formula and figure that out.
Yeah.
there's more certainty, as I've heard from certain folks in the developer community, that there's, in addition to the lower exchange rate, so to speak, right, as Alice mentioned, right, which incentivizes developers to go with AHIF. More bang for your buck. It makes good business sense. I do too. It's also just more predictable.
Right.
So there are kind of dual incentives. I think there's one lane you can take where I'm of the opinion should be it's pro forma asking for more in AHIF, because I don't think the formula is fair at the moment. I think it reflects an earlier era. But on the secondary side, to Alice's point, and something that you're getting at, Matt, there are these local solutions that we can also kind of tease with and put forward perhaps as kind of ancillary suggestions, and saying, okay, we're going to try to move forward with proposing legislation at the same time.
Right.
There are these solutions that we've also discussed that won't have to go to General Assembly, but can try to alleviate a problem using some more novel solution that we haven't really tapped into. So
Yeah, so that's that two
Right.
your approach.
And to my own horn, the thing I like about my option.
We're open to all
Well,
options.
no, but thinking about, sorry. But people like options, and I think that that could be a little bit of you use yourself, the development community, a little bit to say, we're offering an option that maybe provides predictability and maybe provides an option. It's a choice, right? Versus you go through the, dark box of a site plan and you don't know what's necessarily what's going to come out. I do have a question, but I don't want to stall this conversation. But I do want to talk about site plans because I think that's a leverage point too that the county certainly has as far as predictability or not so much predictability for development community that we could think about.
Yeah, no, I think that's actually where I'd like to go, and just that we are on time. Got a little bit of time actually. We're doing well.
Well, and I have a question, but go ahead. I'm happy.
Yeah, let me just.
Yeah.
Yeah, I do like the two-prong approach. For the first part, I just do want to note in the Arlington Community Foundation report, it did recommend that before any changes to do some financial analysis, just to make sure that this is, it doesn't need to be a super complex model, but should have a order of magnitude. Okay, how many more or less units would equalizing produce and what other impacts that could have? It's like if, there's only so much money per site plan that's available to community benefits. If you really raise the housing part of that, the road can't get funded now, and then that has to come from county funds anyway. So it's like it just kind of recycles.
Yeah.
And then the second thing I think is I do like the second approach of other strategies. And I think one of the strategy I really like is that to really utilize the bonus density more, not just in terms of the size of the buildings, but the actual size of the units within the footprint of the building. I think there's a lot of money that can be very easily leveraged to not only produce a lot more smaller affordable units for the market significantly, but also that could really generate significant dollars for committed affordable housing. So I think that can be a dual win for really provide market rate units at significantly lower than what we're doing now and provide committed affordable.
If I could add on to that, I think part of that, and maybe Jason, part of your comment, because we've talked about this a little bit, you sent me an email. I think maybe part of that maybe goes to the extent to which we get through site plan. And there's folks who want to say very reasonably, for very good reasons, we want this many, we want 3-bedroom units, we want 2-bedroom units, we want them to be a certain size, right? And I don't want to put words in your mouth, but maybe part of the solution here is saying, maybe we don't have to be quite as prescriptive. Maybe if applicants actually want to build smaller units and there's more of them to a certain extent, maybe if there are studios or 1-bedrooms, there is a segment of population for whom that works and is attainable, even if some other folks may go, well, I would never live there. There might be some folks who go, 400 square feet actually works perfect for me. I can afford it. I'm by myself, whatever, right?
Or even half the size, 200,
or maybe
200.
200. Yeah. But I could feel like that's kind of what you're saying, is that maybe there's an extent to which we don't necessarily want to be so prescriptive with what the units look like.
Or you could still keep a certain amount of let's say if you don't want to have a full building of a 200 square foot studios. Okay, you could still say enough, but just enough to carve out, right?
Yeah, one quick question for our local experts giving us a lay of the land of other areas. Are there any, do other communities show any differentiation between elderly and non-elderly benefits for building elderly or non-elderly? And I'm saying that because Audrey reminded me of my beginning in housing 50 years ago when I worked at HUD, working on the Section 202 program, and I financed the second edition of Culpeper. And back then we had an elderly bulge, and now we have another elderly bulge that no one's talking about. Right? And I really think if we're doing something in the county for the ordinance, we should probably maybe have a differentiation for elderly and non-elderly. And for those of you that know, it's always easier to get community acceptance for elderly because they don't drive and steal and pillage and whatever.
Just hang around, spend time with them. It's fine. But I really like that point, and to a larger conversation we're having, and maybe.
Well, I won't speak to that.
No, I didn't have anything. Go ahead.
Okay, well, Matt had his hand up.
Yeah.
Is there an answer? I mean,
I think, and I can put you in touch with, I talked to the city of Alexandria because they are trying to prioritize and address housing, affordable housing for older populations, for seniors. And so I don't think they have a different formula, but it could be something. I'll find out more information because I did talk to.
If they're trying to do it, they should give additional bennies.
Right,
Uh,
right.
And I find it really hard that Arlington, I believe we approved the first independent living Crystal 4, the first 80 units in 20 years, which is kind of pathetic.
Mhm.
No. Crystal 4, no, what is it?
6.
Crystal 6, excuse me. Yeah, 82 units independent.
And we know that when you go in, for a low income housing tax credit deal, that it is kind of family or senior, you
Exactly.
designate that way. So that's another opportunity.
Thank
for
you.
that type of fund.
Yeah, and I think True Ground's plan for Marbella too is all or mostly older adults
Okay.
behind you've seen the new one.
Right.
But I don't know the time
I
frame.
think it's like 100.
Yeah, just a comment and a question. So one difference between Arlington and Fairfax and Alexandria is we don't have a housing authority, right? So that creates some challenges for us actually deploying AHIF funds, right? Relying on our nonprofit developers to go through the site plan process and then get LIHTC funding. So one advantage that Fairfax and Alexandria has, they can use county or city-owned property to have P3s and redevelop affordable housing projects on those property, and that's less common here. And obviously, it's way beyond the scope of our conversation here, but as one of your thoughts on whether the authority approach has an advantage over the nonprofit developer approach,
Your mind.
and whether that's having authority is as an advantage.
Well, I think having an authority is an advantage just as you're kind of lining up. I mean, I understand why Arlington does not, and I know it's been talked about a lot here in the county, so it's not necessarily a criticism, and you have amazing housing development partners that you invested in over time to kind of build capacity to do that. So, Fairfax is a moving to work authority. So that's like top, 10% of the RHAs in the country. And that really gives them a lot more flexibility as an entity that ARHA, for example, probably doesn't enjoy. And it's housed within the Department of Housing and Community Development. So it's the same staff. They have a separate board of commissioners, but that really facilitates a lot of the development and a lot of their ability to bring in vouchers, things like that for their own projects. So I think that's an example of it working well. ARHA, again, I think there's been probably a lot of tension between City of Alexandria housing staff and goals and what, that entity is doing. So I guess it's my opinion, maybe not as effective as what Fairfax is housed too.
Oh, in Arlington. Well, we know it's been a item on the ballot 3 times here and rejected hard, very well all 3 times. So I do think that conversation, it does come up, but in my mind, from what I understand in every conversation I've been in, it's too late. Like there's no benefit, right? It would just create another bureaucracy. There's no new funds that would come through an HA that we would not get anyway. So like, why? That's the basic thing. I mean, I'm sure it's much more complicated, but in general, we do very well with our model. That's the way our model has been. Here we are today, and there's really no benefit to changing the model now halfway down how long we are on our journey. So I would say that, and I had one other thing I wanted to say about. I forgot what it was.
Okay. Yeah. Well, yeah, so this is for the both of you all. So we've talked about, I hinted about site plans. Process is a big part of what we do in Arlington, Arlington Way. We love our processes. They're, wonderful. They're also very long, and they certainly have a cost. And they have costs for applicants. They certainly have costs for staff. And in our, I don't want to talk about form-based code. Before we do have the form-based code, we're not going to get a form-based code here, but that is one way in Arlington, right, where we've expedited process in exchange for certain benefits, and that was really to revitalize Columbia Pike. But in your research, just general knowledge, is anybody looking at expediting process as a major leverage point in exchange for more development of affordable housing? Is anybody doing that in Virginia right now? We will offer you this streamlined process and in exchange, here's what you get.
That's kind of loud.
Yeah, Loudoun County has
Okay.
done like one pilot program, one development example, and they guaranteed that they would get through the entitlement process in county, the rezoning for 100% affordable high-tech development in 6 months, and they made it happen. And so now they're considering, I think next month, whether to continue it. It did come at a cost to staff to make that all happen and to kind of beat those timelines, but they proved they could do it. And I think that, obviously time and money and that reduced.
So is entitled, it's like 6 months, like from when they found like a site plan to. Full.
Yeah, I think
Yeah.
so. Yeah.
The
So
entitlement,
typically
okay.
that would take like 12 to 18
Right.
months.
At
So
least.
it saved
Yeah,
a lot of
2 years.
time in Loudoun. I think that's what they were projecting. And also in Loudoun, they have waived like capital impact fees that they called in the county for all affordable developments too. So I think they increased the fees on regular residential, which is an interesting issue, but for affordable, too, they're also trying to reduce fees, which is another way to make costs go down in the process. Although somebody has to pay those fees.
Yeah.
But it's a
Well,
little bit, oh, excuse me.
No, go ahead.
Just a little bit, I think, maybe it was Jason or Joe, I don't know, that idea of, if it were all, if all the money went to affordable housing and that were it, then these other community benefits that we want, could we figure out other pots of money to deal with, like you're saying, streetscape and grounding utilities and all the things that it's like, I think of it like a Christmas tree, by the time we're done and the finances are so tight to make all that happen. It seems like it's a lot of responsibility for a mission-driven organization that's trying to build affordable units. So if we, as a county, really want those, how do we incentivize that to happen the quickest, the cheapest, and figure out something else for the other goals that we have, but maybe not on this Christmas tree, So I know that's been talked about forever and ever, but it definitely could come with some examples on if we did do this, prioritization or at least a list of, suggested activity. But I just realized the other thing I was going to say, this form-based code idea, like, could there be something in the rest of the county, maybe an overlay or something that's talked about what we're saying, if you do 100% affordable with whatever the things are, then here's what you could get. Or if you are willing to, double your AHIF contribution over here, then you could have whatever amount of bonus. And that's like a conversation, it's done. Like, it's just, that predictability, and you pick your avenue and you just go rather than, maybe people would buy in, as you're saying.
Well, that was my second question was, and we love our 100% affordable projects, but we also need our market rate projects. And that's really what we're talking about here. I mean, do we know of any where folks right now, I'm sorry, I'm putting you guys on the spot, but do we know of any where it's market rate projects and they're guaranteeing process efficiencies in exchange for affordable contribution that you're talking about? Is anybody doing that?
I don't know.
Do we know? Yeah, that's just another question
Yeah.
that I have. I
Yeah.
mean, again, to guarantee like the speed of a process here in Arlington, like that would be a pretty significant lift. That would be a major commitment of the county board and the manager, like to do. And then and again, we talk about market rate versus our affordable housing partners. They seem to navigate our process pretty well. And then also this idea of streamlining process, would certainly concern a lot of folks, the scope of community benefits, because we would be really shortening those conversations if they occur at all.
Or just a quick note, we kind of do that with the commercial resiliency, right? Where we're saying, right, that's an expedited process. I mean, they're not getting any additional density on it, but they're not, I mean, that kind of is it, right? So it's like, like when someone's making a decision on, do we want to convert from commercial to residential, that is in competition with the knock it down, build another 10 stories and then add whatever percentage of affordable AHIF contribution. We're not getting AHIF contribution on these conversions. So it's like, that kind of is it. We're like saying, hey, we're allowing you to.
We're moving down that road.
Yeah. So that, I mean, not say it's a direct, but it's like, hey, we're instead of knock it down and redo the foundation and build up, so it's like, we are trading that, just do it now, here's the envelope, just cut it up how you like it.
I think there are also some examples like locally, I know there's regionally rather. I know in Montgomery County, I had to look it up to make sure I was correct here. There's like the green tape process for affordable housing. So basically they expedite their process there. You're talking about if at least 20% of the total number of dwelling units made available are for people whose income is at or below the income level for moderately priced dwelling units as established by their county government. So whatever, let's, for the sake of argument, say that's 60% AMI. Well, right. So if 20% of the overall units are at that level or below, then they get the green tape process. So that might be an incentive to developers saying, hey, like you can go through this expedited process if a number of these are caps, if a number of these are made affordable to a certain level.
Yeah.
Or how we might be able to use the concept of green tape in other scenarios. Because how many examples do we have of market rate buildings with 20% caps if people build that here? Right. So I was going to ask you what you were thinking, Matt, when you heard a couple of these crazy.
Again, not representing the entire.
It's just your personal opinion. But you know, that maybe that green tape could be like similar to what Eric was saying about, like, it's not necessarily going to be, those aren't going to be units in that building, but maybe they would double their AHIF if they knew they could do all this any way they wanted in the building and fast. You know, those kind of trade-offs, do you think?
Yeah, well, I think just certainty in general and knowing with some degree of certainty how long the process will take is hugely valuable, because when developers are doing their due diligence, you know, whether they want to go through this process, they're trying to map out how long is it going to take, which means how long do I have to have an architect, an engineer, a lawyer, a traffic consultant on board? How early on do I have to tie up the property? All of that stuff, just having someone say 9 to 12 months or 12 to 15 months gets you somewhat there. But if you're like, these last 5 projects came in and they were 9 months, 9 months, 9 months, 10 months, then they have a better certainty that how long it will take.
Yes, I don't think Arlington could do the 6 months.
Well-
Maybe we could offer 12 months.
Well,
That would be a big cutback as it is.
darn it, let's be ambitious.
Well, yeah, I would say.
I feel like you're hearing
I
the
wouldn't cut off 6 months. I would say, let's see what's feasible and play it by ear there, right? Maybe 6 months under certain circumstances is feasible, perhaps not, maybe not, but I think it's better to be ambitious than not, right? And I think that's something that we have to, as a community, understand the concept of checking twice, right? Saving the work afterwards. But I think that can kind of lead us into this sort of bureaucratic paralysis that we can kind of find ourselves in. And something I think we're all concerned about, because it does lead us to, I think, generally worse outcomes. And to Matt's point, if we can assure developers of some level of certainty, with the understanding there's going to be a trade-off for that certainty, then we can have a conversation about, okay, what juice can we squeeze out of this, right? What can we extract here, given the enhanced certainty there?
One small point, because I forgot it, Jill mentioned it, and I want to highlight it, because if we recommend anything, I think this is so critical. Love to pilot.
Right, yeah.
So this proof of concept. And I think we love our processes in Arlington, but I think sometimes we're so focused on having a great process, we forget about the proof of concept. And the only way you do that is pilots are very good to do it. And it's a little scary to be like, we're going to do this major thing, but we're only going to do it once or twice. Maybe that's how you have to get the momentum rolling, right? So I think if we were to recommend something like that, I mean, I would strongly be in favor of piloting. We have to get our staff on board. We have to make sure we're adequately staffed. I'm looking at Russell and Alex, but also we need to get support. But a pilot, I think, is the way to go for something like this, because they're trade-offs. Because if you were going to trade off process, there's a lot of other folks outside this room that would be interested in that, because we like to have a lot of discussions about our green space, our open spaces, right? Our sustainability, our historic preservation, all the other goals that we have, right? Expediting the process means you're not necessarily going to have the same robust level of conversation or space that you do in the current site plan. So it's a trade-off. Having a pilot's a great way to see how it goes once, and then we reassess.
I think it's great. For some reason, Arlington seems very averse to pilots. I don't know why that is. Investigate. But it made me think, like, first of all, we have to talk with staff, housing, and especially planning about what they think would be the most feasible, right? Obviously, because they'll be doing the work. But what about gaming out, like having an evening or something when folks come, staffers who do this work in planning, housing, have developers here, all, and like pretend to do one and really be thinking through how feasible it is, as part of, the planning of a pilot.
Yeah, less
Yeah,
questions.
last, just, is it very much in the weeds point, but one issue that's within the time frame for site plans. There's a two-phase process. There's a preliminary site plan,
Right.
which is the technical submission, and there's the final site plan, which is the public review. In the preliminary site plan, that's a pretty open-ended process. How long it will take? It's minimum 2 months, but it can go 3-4 months. And that's between the staff and the developer to make sure you're labeling your storm water lines properly, that the notes are exactly what they're supposed to be. And that's what's eating up so much of the time because, you know, I did a 4.1 recently where we got accepted, I think last November, and we got approved in May. So that's really just 7 months from acceptance to approval. But it
Just the first part.
No, the second part. The
Okay.
first part took a couple, 2 or 3
Okay,
months.
I was confused there.
Yeah, sorry.
I thought it was.
Once we got accepted into the process, it was about 6-7 months.
Okay.
Which is really fast. And then, but the first part is kind of open-ended, and that can really eat into your time.
You say the time burden really, it doesn't come from the latter, more public part. It comes from the beginning one where you're really working out all the technical details.
It's both, but I mean, I'd say the technical details part is not really ever talked about.
Okay.
And
We
You
wanna
have
make
us be, you have us be our season stuff, there's
Yeah.
cadence.
Yeah.
Right, in the second one, usually it's like, okay, here are all the updates.
Right.
You kind of work things out, and then
Right.
they and staff have usually worked enough
You know the
out.
thing they're going.
Yeah, but like I hear what Matt's saying, because it's like, it's a black box and staff can come back with more things.
Yeah.
There's disagreements that the public never knows about.
Thank you. That's clarifying for me. And I think if we're going to do anything, really need to be focused on the first part. The second part, I think, to your point, is fairly routine. Right?
Well, no, so I don't mean to be argumentative, but it both matter
right.
in different ways. Like the
Like,
second
you were
part is
maybe
not
saying, don't
routine.
forget about part.
Yeah,
Yeah.
the second part's not routine. Now, Matt's just saying the first part, we don't know as much about
Mhm.
because it's with the applicant staff.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So with that, I don't mean to be short, but I do want to move on to our third topic because I think it's going to bring together a lot of what this conversation is turning into, which I'm happy about. I want us to be thinking about these things now as we're moving through this process. This is an ambitious ask, but I think we can get a deliverable on the table. Dallas's point around September, October, but we need to be intentional. So with that, I think it would behoove us to move on to the next topic and talk about first the Tischler BIS analysis. Russell can do the honors. We can get a sense of kind of where the county is in terms of our benefits extraction over time, what the research consultant found back in 2023, I think.
Yep. Happy to do that, Brian. So yeah, I'll be reviewing the 2021 Tischler Weiss report on the affordable housing ordinance. The work was done in 2021, it was published in 2023. It was done through the auspices of the county attorney's office, which is one of the reasons why it took a while to get it out to the public, because the board needed to sign off on attorney's work, basically. But I'll also be looking at comparisons of various inflation measures. That's wasn't part of the Tischler Weiss report, and also providing an update on the valuation for on-site units. So there has been some time that's passed. So for everybody's, to refresh our memories, the ordinance has 4 means of compliance for providing affordable housing. On-site units at 5% of the gross floor area, less the first 1.0 floor area ratio, or offsite at a slightly higher, or offsite further away at basically twice the rate of what would be on site. Or a cash contribution, which has a formula which is completely separate and divorced from the calculations for these on-site units. Both the ordinance and the Code of Virginia, which enable it, kind of lay out that the purpose of this was to provide affordable housing, and that unless a different option is selected by the applicant, ADUs shall be provided on site. So there's this emphasis on the on-site unit. The Code of Virginia says the applicant shall provide the on-site dwelling units as part of the project, but then goes on to say, but as an alternative, they may elect one of the following. So the kind of standard is the on-site unit, and the others are alternatives to that. I think that's an important distinction. We're looking at balancing things. Well, why aren't we balancing the on-site units to the cash contribution? It's because the on-site units were kind of the primary and forefront, what was set as the standard, and alternatives to that were put forth as options for the developer to choose. In all these cases, the means is entirely up to the developer. And as has been noted, the cash contribution is king. That's what developers like. And so the question, you can hit the button there. The question, I love Melissa Bondi's analogy of the chocolate cake. So the task was to make sure that all the pieces of the cake were equal. So that, you could choose whichever one you want, but one wouldn't be bigger than the other. They'd be all roughly the same size. The fact that cash contributions have been the overwhelming majority, it's like somebody said 99% of the time, begs the question, are those slices even? And so that was the impetus for commissioning this study.
I think her point during her meeting was if you knew that someone else was cutting your slice of cake, you wouldn't shortchange the other guy.
Yeah.
Because you knew that would happen to that. This is kind of an example of perhaps the process isn't so blind, right? The guy's peeking and saying, okay, let me just get a little more of the cake here. So
yeah. So there are two study questions, and I'm going to start with the second study question. If you could slide. Because the second one, I don't think that there wasn't, it was a little bit inconclusive. So I want to focus more time on the first one. But the second study question was whether the ordinance, the cash contribution requirement for affordable housing has remained consistent as a share of total development cost over time. Specifically looking at where we were in 2021 with kind of those early site plan applications received shortly after the 2005. And what they found was that affordable housing ordinance contributions, they were consistently below 1.5% of development costs, with some of them less than 1%. That the contributions as a share of total development costs, it's decreased for recent projects to about half of what it was for vintage projects. So it's less, and led them to state that it may, not necessarily does, but may indicate that the contribution amount has not kept pace with costs or development costs. So I'm going to take a minute here to talk about kind of different inflationary measures. So the ordinance is tied to the consumer price index for housing for the Washington, Baltimore metropolitan statistics. That's the red line, and that's in the middle of this chart. But how does that compare to other measures? How does that compare that the CPI for housing, it outpaced the CPI for all items. So all items together was 54%, and we were at 64% for housing. But it tracked closely if we looked at average rents for site plan projects, all site plan projects since 2005. Basically, those rents have tracked almost exactly with that CPI. It's a little bit nudged up a little bit above this last year, but it's 64%. What's interesting, the area median income, and this is our measure for establishing affordable rents, could also be looked at as an inflationary cue. We've really seen that pick into high gear, basically, since the pandemic, starting in 2021. And that's since tracking from 2006 to 2025 has gone up by 81%. And that we'll see that change and what that means, because that means the gap between what the affordable rents are and what the market rents is getting smaller. Yeah. They're getting closer together. And then the last one, which unfortunately doesn't have a time series going all the way back, so it starts in 2009, is the producer price index for construction for private capital investment. And what you'll notice, that's the purple line, that just escalated tremendously in 2020, 2021 and 22, far outpacing the CPI. But what that means is it's costing developers more to build projects. So that's not necessarily a good thing. It doesn't mean that because their costs are going up, they can therefore afford to provide more affordable housing. It probably means a little bit the contrary. It's costing them more to build and they have less room, less wiggle room. So just wanted to lay these out, given that one of the findings was that perhaps, the CPI wasn't the best measure. I think for our purposes here, the CPI for housing, and especially because it is a regional index, really is the right and appropriate thing to track as an inflationary. You need something to adjust for inflation, and thank goodness we have. Because if we had to do this every year, it would not be pretty. And there was a second part to that second study question, which was how was the share of affordable housing contributions? How does that compare to other community benefits? And it was really inclusive. I mean, the community benefits package is so dependent on a project specific location and other factors that they really couldn't draw any. So we'll move on to probably the more pressing and really what this group is trying to look at is how does the affordable housing ordinance cash contribution requirement compare to the difference between revenue generated from those restricted rents and market rents. So when we ask a developer or require a developer to provide on-site units, there's a delta. Mm-hmm. That delta has a value, and that's an easily observable value. And this is a really simplified interpretation of the approach that Tischler Weiss took. I think they've got a bunch more steps on their document, but I want to make it a little bit clearer. So the first thing that they needed to do was look at what the current market rents were. And when we say current, we're talking about 2021 for their analysis. So what were the current rents for the different bedroom size units? And what were the current restricted rents by unit size? So what's the cap required? And then calculating what is the difference between those two, and then converting that into an annualized amount. So you know what it is monthly, let's get an annual figure. And then they can actually put a value on that by applying a capitalization rate to that. So what the heck is a capitalization rate? A cap rate or a capitalization rate, it's a metric that's used in real estate economics to estimate the potential return on an investment for an income producing property. It usually is based off of net operating income. For the purposes of this study, it was based on just that we were just looking at that delta. And the reason they didn't use net income is because you need to know a lot about each property and what's going on there. But it shouldn't cost significantly more. They should be really the same. The costs of operating a committed affordable unit in a project as to the market rate, especially if they're mixed in with them. You got the same management, same everything. So part that you're netting out would be the same for both. And what we're looking at is that delta. So yeah, it's not the same, but so when they did this, really focused on 1 and 2 bedrooms. There's show studios 1, 2s, and 3s. But if we were to have affordable units, because based on square footage, we would likely be getting kind of something between the 1 and the 2 bedroom units. So given that at this time in 2021, market rate rents, we're looking at the median between the 1 and the 2 bedroom, we're a little bit less than 3,000, 2,990. The restricted rents for 60% AMI units, including the utility adjustment, was 1,429. So the rent difference between what they can get for the non-restricted unit and the restricted unit, roughly $1,500. Multiplied by 12 is 18,735. So in 2021, the capitalization rate was 4.3. according to CoStar, commercial real estate platform that is a go-to source for that type of information. To determine the value, you divide that annualized revenue by that cap rate, and that returns a result for that value of the foregone revenue of $435,620. So their findings, when they did two example projects to look at how it's actually working, and found that cash contribution was equal to about 1/3 or 1/2 the actual value of the revenue from those market rate units. So significantly undervalued what the contribution had been. Further went on to state that the cash contribution option is the least costly means of compliance with the ordinance, and that rather than being one among comparable compliance mechanisms, it is the means of compliance with the ordinance.
Cheaper Andy's here.
So what's changed between 2021 and 25? We'll look at the data but there've been some changes. And you'll see that the value of that foregone revenue has gone down quite a bit. Why is that? Well, the cap rate currently is at a higher place, and the cap rate is in the denominator. You have a higher denominator, you get a smaller number at the end of the day. The restricted rents, 60% AMI, has gone up significantly for the last 4 years, 31% the last 4 years. There was 1 year it went up by 10%. And this impacts what those affordable units can go for. So it's actually a higher rent right now. So the difference, market rents haven't risen as fast as that affordable thing, which would be affordable restriction. Talk about what that means more broadly. And then effective rents for market rate units for 1 bedrooms, they increased by 6.7%. For 2 bedrooms, 0.2%. So that's very little change, which might be astounding.
Interested in why 1 bedroom units have increased by so much compared to 2 bedroom.
Sometimes spreadsheet with all this, there's because I also looked at over a 30-year period. And so what was interesting is the units from 95 to 2000 or 95 to 99, the studios were basically at the same rent as the studios being built now. So what's different? The studios in 1995 were about 130 square feet bigger. And so, you're not looking at it. And the Tischler-Bice analysis actually goes into kind of square foot analysis. We've kind of stripped that out for the purpose of our discussion today, because there's a lot of numbers on the screen and the mind can glass over quickly. The size of the units is one of the factors.
You're getting less for your money. That's where trade-off is.
Yeah. So, Brian, I know you asked me to compile a table of site plan projects that have been approved since 2021. Yeah. So I did that and looked at those and the number of units that would have been if the developer chose to provide units, as well as the cash contribution for those units. And the last column you see is what that contribution per unit would be for each of those projects. You'll see it varies dramatically. And that's because our formula has nothing to do with that option number 1 of the on-site unit. So when you take the cash contribution and divide it by that, you get pretty a wide variety. I mean, there's a big outlier with the 87,000 per unit for Joyce Motors. There's one that's like 250,000.
Sunrise.
225 at Sunrise.
Yeah.
Is it?
Yeah, and so these are kind of outliers. Generally, it's kind of between, 120 and 200 in that band. And obviously, the cash contribution, the formula changes over time. I haven't adjusted these to say, well, if they were all today's formula, they would be this. But it gives you an idea. Over the last 5 years, $26 million basically in cash contributions. And so if we divide that by the number of units,
186.
yeah, we would get an average contribution per unit of $144,000. Now compare that to the valuation of foregone revenue from the 2021 study and the valuation of foregone revenue from 2025. So based on the same group of projects, it's a smaller amount of foregone revenue, but it's still significantly higher than that average contribution per unit. How much higher?
It's almost double.
Yeah, almost double. So
That's that half
That's yeah,
value we're getting.
right. You're
so yeah,
almost on the number actually.
that's what the Tischler Price study said. There was 1/3 to 1/2 value of the unit. So, and the Tischler Price study, the valuation there, the difference is 200% from the units they were looking at, which would mean 3 times the rate. But again, we need to, things change, and you don't want something calibrated so tightly that when things change, everything seizes up at once. There needs to be some room for wiggling to ensure that things are still feasible. And lastly, I want to, Brian, you asked me to show what if we had a higher contribution rate? What if it was 50% higher? What if it was 100%? What would have that meant over the last, from 2021 till now? So instead of $26 million, which is more or less equal to 260 CAF units, we could have had 40 million or 400 CAF units. Or if we had a increase of 100%, it 53 million. These aren't recommendations. These are just illustrative. Happy to pull this together for you because, it's just something to consider. It's something to ponder of what an alternative might mean or could look like. Obviously, there's nuance and detail in anything that come out of it. Yes.
When we're looking at the 28 million, the 40 or 26 million, 40 million and 53 million, that's the total that we would have gotten between 2021.
Yeah.
Or
Well, the
like
total
payments?
on site plans that have been approved. So we haven't received the money. They pay it when they get their certificate of occupancy. But the board has approved between 2021 and 2025, maybe 19 projects. And of those, we'd either get 106 units if the developers should suddenly change their minds and opt for the units on site, or we'll get $26 million whenever these projects get built.
And it's under certain conditions, if we had 50% more, 100% more, that's how much money we would have gotten had they stuck with paying into AF instead of doing the caps. So the conversation is not about the caps, it's more about the contributions.
That's assuming I mean, some of those 19 are sitting right now because they can't, no feasibility, and that's assuming that if we did change to that number, that plans would even be put forth.
Well,
Can
yeah,
you say it again, Jason?
Well, I mean, because those 19 are approved, but many of those are sitting,
Stalled.
and then would they still have been proposed as, I mean, they're already stalled with the current, I mean, not saying like there are other factors stalling, but if you impose another per, a couple million, was it another 1-2 million per, would that stall further, or would that, that's where the economic evaluation analysis.
Right.
Yeah, I mean, many of these have been built already, the Commodore, the Wendy's, the
Eames is on ice.
but this is typical. I mean, if you look back over, 20 years of site plans, you see some site plans were built in 3 years, some took 10, 13 years. So there's a whole, every development has its own internal drama and internal finances and internal struggles to be realized.
So sorry, I just have a
Yeah.
Am I just going to question number 2 as the site plan contributions as share of development costs? I'm just curious, like, looking at the methodology, right? They picked 4 vintage projects and then 4 recent projects, but the reason why the vintage looks so much better in terms of AHO and total community benefit value as percentage TDC is because the one Central Place it looks really good, but like if you remove that and then you remove the worst performing from the recent, like, I'm just curious, like what your thought, like, these were projects in 2006, 2007 before the financial crash took place. And these are just 4 out of some.
Yeah.
And then we're comparing just 4, how, wouldn't it make sense to look at like over time and look at every single one as a weighted average versus just saying, because I'm like, Central Place here, it's got 11% total community benefit value as TDC. Like that's really breaking the average up. It's like, I don't, to me, it's like, I know they're just, it would take a lot of time to look at every single project, but like, to me,
It's an apples and apples comparison.
yeah, I'm just worried that like, were these picked, same and like, that, this is, the valuation. I'm not saying the valuations are like 100% correct, but like, I'm looking for just this figure 7, like these are, like it looks like to me is that some of the recent projects perform quite well as like community benefits as total development costs. So I think that, I mean, AHO obviously is still, I mean, just statistical validation of that. I'm just concerned that people say, oh, like we're getting less community benefit now. It's like, I think there's some data missing.
Yeah, and to your point, the community benefits. So I think that second part of that question in there about that is a little bit further removed from the ordinance, because when you're talking about the community benefits package, it's more closely tied in with the bonus density than with just the general site plan package. So whereas the ordinance is that base density, and so it's really, I wouldn't focus too much in on that community benefits package, but it does raise the question, if the ordinance were to be adjusted and increased, that's, more money in the developer's pocket. When it comes time to negotiate those community benefits, will there be an impact?
And just to put a fine point, the community benefits and bonus density is tied to the appraised value of the bonus density.
Yeah.
In the last couple of years, the appraised value of bonus density has gone down a lot. So $100 a square foot for 100,000 square feet of bonus density is a lot more than $50 a square foot for 100,000 square feet of bonus density. So that's why I think there's variation over the years, because it's really tied to the appraised value.
And I just have one more slide, actually, just to talk, because unfortunately, Michelle Winters couldn't be with us tonight, and Mary Hines couldn't be with us tonight, but did want to, and I hope you had time to read, and I know it's been mentioned a couple times already tonight, the Arlington Community Foundation report that was done. This was done in 2020, basically to look at the ordinance, and the Community Foundation, they did a number on, I forget how many, significant number, like 20 stakeholder interviews, developers, people from various perspectives on the ordinance, to try and see if we could squeeze more juice out of it, or what could be changed. Their basic research question was, can more units of affordable housing be achieved through changes to our affordable housing ordinance? And there was general agreement amongst those consulted that the in-lieu payment was significantly lower than the cost of putting units on site. Surprise. And that any change in the calculation of in-lieu fees in the ordinance, it would result in an increase to the cost to the developer and entitling the project. Yeah, not unsurprising. But further that the calculation adjustments for the in lieu payments would be unlikely to receive the broad support needed at that time to pass the General Assembly. So the work was done, and there were a host of recommendations that were outside the ordinance. So this group's here to look at the ordinance, and there's a host of, and some of these things have been discussed tonight. But in looking at just putting our blinders on and looking at the ordinance, it's one needs to consider the political environment, the likelihood of success in putting something forward. One doesn't know what the landscape will look like down the road. So it's good that we're having the discussion and good that we're looking at it and preparing in case an opportunity or a window opens for that.
So
Yeah, just another thought on the ordinance in general too. This may be a question. I know right now the ordinance is set up in a way that the more the more FAR you go, the steeper the penalty, the steeper it costs to earn it. Would it be possible to perhaps like invert that, where you say you pay a lot for the initial? Because and this maybe more research, but I know a lot of projects are limited. There are some times where the max FAR is not reached, and we're not getting, there could be more bonus that could be gained for the AHO. But what if the pyramid was inversed, where it was a super high base, and then it was a little bit less steep at the top to incentivize going, once you breathe, we do a super, I'm just saying, hypothetical example, super high base, and then at the top level, it's lower. So it's oh man, as long as you're breaching that certain level, there's a lot of incentive to just max out. But I don't know how many projects are not maxing out versus there are other limitations on the height or other things that are causing that form to not reach the full potential to get all that extraction.
Well, yeah, depending on the general land use plan designation for a site. Typically, the max FAR that they can get loved is about 5, right? And so we've got that between 3 to 5 is the highest tier. And then after 5, that becomes the negotiation for the site plan where affordable housing, I think, does very well as part of that benefits package that's negotiated as part of that bonus density. The black box, if you will.
But affordable housing is not really a black box.
No. And to your point, this is based on the valuation of that additional density. This is something that's known and it's got a dollar amount that's attached to it. And we know the value of it, or the developers know the value of it, and the county knows the value of it. We sit down and try and work out how best to distribute that so that it's equitable.
What did you think about Jason? Maybe you or Matt, what did you think about his idea?
Well, so you're talking about the cash contribution rate on the base alone. And if you invert it, there's actually not a lot of site plans that go above 3 on the base. Most of them go up to 3.24 at the max. So you're really only collecting the money, another 2 on 0.24 FAR usually there. Obviously inverting it would make it a larger startup cost, for the buildings that are seeking less FAR. But I would say there are very few projects that are making a contribution between that 3 to 3.24 or above, because most really are kind of at a 2.5 FAR that we're seeing on the base as a max density. So I'm not sure how the numbers would work out exactly, but there isn't a whole lot of value really being captured, even though it is, $12.65 there isn't a whole lot of actual square footage that is going into that.
Just to me, I know 2.5, that to me doesn't seem that, to me it's the max. I'm thinking, we got Roslyn at 10. And it's I feel like there's a lot of places where, I'm not saying everyone needs to go there, but I feel like there's still a lot of I mean, this may be the conversation, the general land use, like going up, like what opportunity does that bring now? Like we're going to open up all this because, you know, how, I don't know what the last time we've changed this is like our AHO is, and it's like in bonus density too, is where there's a lot of other barriers that was like, no, I don't want to go from, you know, 7 to 10 stories because it's like it's just, there's no, we're hitting these like step increases. And it's like, how can we breach these barriers so that we are making sure that at all steps of different development tiers of that we're maxing it out to the greatest possible versus just, you know, incentivizing, you know, we're missing out on envelopes that we could be creating in certain sites. So just
An interesting one to put, you know, kind of in the parking lot, or, you know, to think about what we could be doing, maybe even separately from this, to incentivize more supply, right? We need so much supply, even if it's not anywhere near. So that, you know, what people are choosing for whatever set of reasons not to go, like the example, the one in Boston, right, at 66.
Yep.
They don't want to go over 7 or 8 stories, and the ones next to them are like 15 or something, but there's like financial reasons they won't
Yeah.
go up.
There's that.
So-
And what I've heard on, you know, SBRCs talking to applicants is
Yeah.
right now, I mean, some of these applicants are just seeking to get this, you know, entitled as quickly as possible and through construction as quick as possible to get to market. So some of them are saying 5 is fine as
Mhm.
opposed to 8
Yeah.
right now.
With
And-
costs.
And you know, that's the Pentagon City River House. It's a great example, right? Of that applicant actually coming under quite a bit on the density, right? And having commissioners go, wait a minute, weren't you gonna build more? No, we're good, you know? And so we actually have that dynamic, which I think some of us aren't quite as used to.
No.
Yeah.
Interesting.
Yeah, I was at the site plan on the inn at Roslyn, and they're at 7, they could have gone 12. And that thing has been on the books for 20 years. They have money problems. And, you know, so this is where you're sympathetic to the developer, give them breaks on some stuff so they can build it. So at least we get the supplies.
So I just want to share this one. I didn't have this in my book deck, but this models out what our formula looks like. And looks at the value of that on-site unit by the floor area ratio. So the ordinance only applies above 1.0 FAR, so it kicks in at 1.01.
Mhm.
So at that point, because you're paying on that, and the contribution is calculated including that 1.0 FAR, your contribution would be really high relative to the number of units you would have to provide. So significantly, like 250% of what. So the couple projects we've had where we've had units provided on site, they tend to have been in that narrow range, and it tends to have been that there was a something between the ceiling of the glove was low enough, and they were getting density above that. But it quickly goes down to below 50% of the value. And then just, you know, moderately takes up as the higher tier comes in after the 3.0 FAR. Just an interesting visual. If you were gonna draw what you wanted your ordinance to look like, you probably wouldn't draw it. You probably wouldn't do this, but I don't know if this was done back in the day.
That brings me to a question when we were talking the other day, Russell, that why is it that the first 1.0 is exempted? And is that something? Is there a reason? I don't know the reason why we
Yeah.
did that. And what if that weren't the case?
Yeah, so the reason why in the calculation of unit contribution, why the first 1.0 FAR is exempted is because that is akin or is a proxy to what that by right development is. So they could go, a developer could say, I'm gonna just do my by right and all it did. And so we're saying, well, because you're going through a site plan and you're asking for more, it's that density above that by right is where we're asking for the affordable housing, which kind of aligns with the other section of the Virginia code that we're no longer under, where it's, you're getting more than what the zoning allows. And so therefore, we're asking for affordable housing. But then we have kind of two tiers to that, where we've got up to the glove and we've got above the glove. So the 1.0, yeah, it's a good question, and begs, it's worth reinforcing that first 1.0 is a proxy for the by right development.
Thank you.
Really appreciating doing a little bit of a summary on the ACF report as well. Unfortunately, she said we're able to get Michelle to do a presentation, but I think kind of get a general gist of what's going on with the ordinance and some of the findings over the last couple of years. And I really appreciate you doing the favor of kind of breaking out over time what our marginal benefit would have been, all things had equal, if we were able to set a higher rate on our extraction for in lieu contributions. So with that, I want to open up the group just to a brief conversation to kind of talk about next steps, right? So as been noted earlier, there is a somewhat tight timeline as to when we'll have to present a well, first to the Housing Commission to approve, then to the board. And that's notwithstanding the process of talking to housing and particularly planning staff, and also doing the work of some light circulation of our findings to the community, so as to have a sense of general buy-in before we approach the Housing Commission. So as we've been talking about, so where we are with the ordinance, what the general landscape is, just kind of set a floor of what we should be looking at, recognizing that models locally don't necessarily map onto what we're doing here, as been stated earlier. I think we have a better understanding of where we as an organization should be moving forward with it. I think looking at trying to raise the amount of ask in terms of in lieu contributions as a matter of principle is a wise policy. Now, the devil is in the details there, right? And as Russell stated, you want to give some level of flexibility. You don't want to get right up onto that line where you're maybe asking one-to-one trade-off. And if you've seen from 2021 until 2025, you've gone from almost a 3 times amount of money left on table to 100%. So you effectively reduced it by about a third the rate of return that a developer would have made by simply going through in-cash contributions process. So I think given that decline in on-table money we're sacrificing, let's say that can't be reversed, but just keeping that in mind, we would want to make any sort of adjustment sensible, right? Given the trend, right, that Russell's pointing out with useful information here. So I want to open that up to group to get a sense of where you all thought about that. And I'm not saying that that's an exhaustive task for us, right? I think we can do that, we can have that conversation, a larger one over what that rate looks like, right? You know, setting that rate, setting, okay, is are we asking for 30% more? So 50% more was demonstrated there. What does that look like? And that would probably include a roundtable discussion, frankly, not just with those members here in the room, but and I would like to lean on some of the membership that have connections to the business community, particularly the developer community, those who are in the nonprofit space, right? Those who are also working with local community groups that have interest in this, to find a few relevant partners to really work that out, right? And have the consensus around what this rate will look like, instead of us kind of unilaterally saying, okay, this is what this number is going to be. We're going to pluck this out and this is what you're gonna have to take. That being said, I do want to also acknowledge some of the side conversations we've been having tonight that Eric's brought up and Alice brought up, and others regarding the ability to refine the local process, right? I appreciate Jill and Alice kind of going into their dual track thinking of observing not only the objective we set out to do, perhaps some other worthy ideas like creating a green tape process that, to Matt's point, would use already existing methods just to make an easier and more predictable system occur that could bring about more AHIP contributions if, as Eric said, that came with a reasonable trade-off. And perhaps that's something we should also consider as part of a recommendation package to the Housing Commission. Maybe it won't be something that we take on, but we can investigate and recommend for the Housing Commission and bring it to them in October or so. So with that said, I'd like to open things up for a brief conversation, talk about next steps.
I would probably need an hour. I mean, this is all great information. I wish we had the Arlington Community Foundation's report, which I ran out of ink and I didn't print out. And maybe I'd ask Russell, are there any of their recommendations worthy of our attention to look at? Because I was looking, they went into a lot of detail, and I know Mary Hines, they went to the marrow, and some of it may be good. And it would be good to shake the system up. But not to shake the system up to steer the developers, but some of these things from 5 years ago may actually work now in this tariff environment, et cetera. So I would maybe like to see if we can get Mary or Michelle to give us a quick rundown of theirs, or we'll just read it or whatever, but we should look at that. I really think, and I agree with what you were saying, but I really think it's going to be a give and take. Like everything else. And we got to look at the developers and look at what we need and stuff like that. It really shames me, and I've sat on enough site review committee things when the monument people who had this in at Roslyn for like 25 years and couldn't develop it, and now is trying to develop it, but had to really shave it down. And then you see the Red Fox Inn, which is going to be, 12 stories, and you got this little ditzy 241 unit. And it's at 7 stories when the land and such could have been at 12 stories, but they didn't have the money. So why don't they have the money? Maybe we gig them on tree cover and lead at the Cadillac version and not lead at the basic version. And I raised this at the site review thing, and I asked the developer, what was the difference in cost between the additional bennies that the county wanted you to do to meet the bare minimum? And he really couldn't come up with that thing. But what I'm saying is, when we're trying to get supply written, everyone would like a Cadillac, but we can't afford a Cadillac. So why don't we go with the Ford and get it done quickly? And I think the county should be able to give allowances, just like they're giving allowances on the commercial to residential. All right. And I think everyone's got to give for the common purpose. So. I mean, that's kind of where my head's at, and I wouldn't want to be constrained by the old ordinance and just change the numbers, but I think we should be creative based on.
Yeah, I think there's got to be an economic evaluation of what impacts have, because, there's a lot of sites that are right now commercial, and they're going to be using this commercial residential framework, which is going to keep the existing envelope, which is a good thing, right? We're attacking our vacancy, but that comes at a cost of knocking it down, building, whatever could be through the process of getting these units. And now if we, let's say, raise our contributions, they're going to look and say, oh, I don't want to, this is even higher now. I'm just going to go to this other process. And then our number of CAFs could be less because they decided, oh, we're just going to do, the base. We're not going to worry about getting this extra far out of our development. So, and I think this also goes into, this is going to go to the Housing Commission, but the Housing Commission's interest is to get more CAFs. Let's say this goes to, let's say, the C2E2 Commission, they probably would not like it, because then when it comes to bonus density, the county board is not going to have as much flexibility in granting all these lead and other things, because that total community benefits package is now going to be more weighed towards the housing, which may not be a bad thing. That may be something that we want to do going forward in all projects, is to really weigh affordable housing contribution, which AHO would definitely tilt the scales. But other commissions are going to be like, oh no, like the transportation commission, we're not going to get as much, money for the bike lane or the traffic signal, because the AHO is now going to capture some of that money. So I'm just want to make sure that whatever is changed is that it's not just simply tilting the scale. I mean, that's, if we want to do that, that's what we want to do. But I think it's got to be careful of, like Joe said, everyone wants the Cadillac. We all want like the contribution be higher. We all want to be like LEED, platinum, like, net zero with solar panels and like all the, geothermal wells and things, and a community garden on the roof. But it's very hard to approach that and look at the holistic impacts on site and what's being incentivized in terms of what we're benefiting, which is of course the more CAFs. So that's just.
Well, I think I agree with some points. One issue though, that I think we have perhaps stated, but maybe not explicitly, is that there is a benefit in of itself of simply obtaining more contributions, right? Like regardless of how many caps are made as a result of this, getting a fair deal in terms of AHIP contribution, I think is a win. I see your point, but I think you're approaching from the perspective of like, okay, getting more caps is our main goal, and then we are somehow siphoning off resource from other barrels. That's, I don't think, really kind of within our purview. I appreciate the holistic approach and looking at it, but I don't think we should be in the business of thinking of what's transportation gonna say, because that's not really what we're doing. That's an effect, right? But I don't think that's something that we should necessarily.
That shouldn't stifle what we want to do.
Right.
I totally.
That's not exactly. That shouldn't be coming in and saying, well, okay, if CTVT says this, I guess we can't do it. I don't think that's really we shouldn't be thinking that way, in my view.
Yeah, it's maybe just build off this conversation. For these projects, they're basically big math problems, and affordable housing is a very important part of that.
My strong suit, though.
Yeah, but like if the base AF contribution numbers formula goes up, the natural question will be like, well, what goes down, right? Because you have to balance things. So, I think if the movement is towards increasing the base AF formula, then we have to be thinking about what can be done in terms of, getting a bonus density through additional AF contributions, or there are other things like what's in the Community Foundation report that are other parts of the process that cost real money, right?
Yes.
Like easement vacations cost money. Your real estate assessments go up immediately after your entitlements, right? Could there be a tax abatement through state code? Are there other ways to offset the increase in the AF contribution? Because if the posture we're bringing forward is, well, we just need to increase the AF contribution, I think some people might say, well, why would we just increase the price of what we're doing? It's like going to the grocery store and the milk's $5 and the grocery store says, well, let's just make it 10.
Right.
I mean, there's gonna be less demand, right? So there has to be something to offset it, because at the end of the day, it's a math problem and it's literally a spreadsheet to see if it pencils out.
Balanced out, yeah.
And if one number goes up drastically, doubles, and it doesn't pencil out, then the project probably won't.
You gotta give incentives for the developer to build. I mean, that's the whole thing.
Yeah, no, that's a great point, and it's something that I think we really need to explore for the next month. And that kind of comes to an ask of mine, is that members of this body, we can meet offline and have this conversation. I think Matt's actually exactly on the right page, right? Like, we need to be able to make this pencil out for people, but we can have a lot of really ingenious ways of doing that, right? Sorry. I think there's a benefit to asking, how can we make the process simpler? How can we reduce these cumbersome fees, as pointed out in the ACF study, while also asking for a fairer deal on that? I don't think these are mutually exclusive. I think there's an opportunity there that we unfortunately just haven't capitalized on. So if everyone is in agreement on that point, I'd love for us to have a longer conversation online, and Russell and Alex and I can work together, and I can loop in Kellen as chair to help coordinate this. But I think that's really where we should be going, is figuring out how do we make those balances and frankly, what is the number we can settle on that pencils out against exchanging those benefits, as Matt pointed out.
Regulatory relief is a very sexy name. So do we have any studies from you all, from the development community to the county of we could do better if you did this? Is there anything like that?
One.
Is there one?
Affordable, they fulfill the promise.
Oh, yeah, that's from the affordable housing perspective.
mean,
Did
it's
you mean like market rate or did you mean affordable?
Oh,
Oh, yeah.
oh,
Yeah, so
because you can't do one without the other. Supply is supply.
yeah, we can send it around. There's a document called Fulfilling the Promise. And it was like 2018, I believe. It was like 3 years after the Affordable Housing Master Plan came. Through, and
Okay.
we weren't seeing a lot of.
Well, I think we should maybe look at those things, or if the development community has something more covered.
Yeah,
So those, that would be part of what this kind of alternative list that we're talking about, that they have many recommendations on there. This report has some recommendations, so we can pull those
Good.
things
Now,
together.
that would be
I don't
great.
think those specifically would inform us about this like formula discussion, but it's certainly useful to look at. And again, it is 7 years old, so maybe tweaking, but absolutely, those are suggestions. They really did come from the affordable housing development perspective. So I don't know,
Right.
you know, off the top of my head, all of the, how relatable they are to broader, you know, all kinds of development.
to put a finer point on some of the things that Matt, I think Eric, you were also saying earlier in the conversation, like as we look at the ordinance specifically and try to figure out both a fair ratio as well as consider some alternative means of easement for developer community to make these balances make sense. I think that's something that we can tackle as part of that more contained conversation, and then we can have a larger one on the side about recommendations. So I just want to be able to keep those kind of things separate, because one will be more of a tangible deliverable. The other one will be a set of recommendations that the Housing Commission can debate upon. But in terms of considering what the number should be, right, or what the percentage should be for the contributions, as well as going through the ACF document, if you guys haven't already, really recommend is somewhat dense, but like it's very, very helpful. I think that's something that we should look at and follow up with offline before our next meeting, to kind of come up with an economic analysis model of, you know, what are we going to pitch both as an ask and a promise to. This is the number we're going to be requesting now, right? We're going to be maybe asking for 30% more in terms of AHOWG contributions. In exchange, here are some, you know, benefits to you that we're going to also extend to make this pencil out for you.
And Brad, just one thing, I think, so some things like, let's say if we do expedited site review,
Yeah.
that does come at a cost, but I think going back to what I was saying earlier with the bonus density, with, you know, number, say, hey, we'll let you take these 20 units that you were going to be 650 square feet, chop them in half. Boom, we can, I mean, I think there's so much, and that's free, you know, you don't need the county to contribute more resources. You don't need to do tax, you know, other vacations that's county money. That's just like free in the air, saying, hey, instead of having these, you know, the unit sizes, that's a, and I know that does take place in the bonus density, but there's so much more I think that the county can do, and bonus density provision would be super powerful to unlock. I mean, and you know, 30, I mean, we're talking really lucrative.
Yeah.
So what would you call that? Just a flexibility in, because they could build the unit.
Carrot and stick.
No, but I mean, what you're talking about, allowing this, you know, use the envelope, put as many units
Those are
as you want.
like flexibility easement measures.
Like we have, like the county does this with the bonus density. They allow to go from like, you know, 100 units per acre to like 150, right? This would be like, so like, okay, what if we really bump that up? And you'd still put provisions around, like, let's say you have a building, you know, I know there's other buildings that have different like segments of the building. Some buildings you have like a certain segment that you have the smaller unit types, or you have to, depends on what the site is like. But, you know, right now the county, I think, hits certain levels where it's like, we're not going to let you go far enough on bonus density, because it would be, if when you're talking unit sizes as small as, sub 300 square feet, you can do a lot of units, and that may I don't scare people when they see like the number of unit counts that these buildings can produce, because that's so small and you can fit so many. But the number of people actually is not going to be necessarily that much greater, because let's say you have a 2-bedroom, with like 4 people. Yeah, you could, the building would still hold, similar levels of people, but it just would be, instead of sharing, a 2-bedroom at like 1,000 square feet, you've got like, it just.
Well, this conversation about the bonus density, and so I just want.
I think it would enable, I know the AHO is just based on FAR, but I think some of those components could be in exchange. Like this is something where I think it's an easy exchange that could take, we're talking about vacations and processes. Like this could be an easy one. Say, hey, like you're going to pay 30% more, but we're going to really grant a lot more bonus density, provided, you still have some 3 bedrooms or 2 bedrooms or 1 bedroom certain size. We're not going to do a 20-story building, micro units all the way through. Not say that would be work, but I think a lot of these things that we're looking at are very small benefits, or they would cost the county a lot to do, tax abatement processes or hiring staff, that's budget impact.
Well, I think Matt would maybe disagree with you on the smallness of them, but on that, I am a man of my word. We are at 9:02, and I do want to get time. I think we can have a conversation about what should be considered as a recommendation that we can put forward to the county board and to the housing commission, and what we should be doing as a function of our work on this commission. So as I said earlier, Russell, Alex, and myself will circle back and try to set up something with us and perhaps a smaller working group to be a part of that, and talking about just some of these things that we've been discussing tonight, and really kind of getting into the weeds of, all right, what is this analysis kind of like, what trade-offs are feasible, what percentage do we think is sensible given those trade-offs to the developer community, and then having our own conversations with members of the community and trying to bring them in and saying, we are talking about this. If you'd like to have input, come meet with us, right? Because this is of import to you, and the door is open, but you have to be willing to come and play ball. We're going to be serious about this. This isn't going to be a time for you to kind of tut about how things have been this way for all eternity. Like, no, we're making change. Things are happening. You can be a part of the process or not. That's on you. But with that, I appreciate you all for giving me 2 hours of your time on Tuesday evenings. And
Here's